and generations to come. It is our collective responsibility to critically interrogate our histories, to repair harm, and to honor, protect, and sustain this land. We also recognize and acknowledge that the labor upon which our country, state, and institutions are built. We remember that our country is built on the labor of enslaved people who were kidnapped and brought to the United States from the African continent, and recognize the continued contribution of their survivors. We acknowledge all immigrant and indigenous labor, including voluntary, involuntary, trafficked, forced, and undocumented peoples who contributed to the building of the country and continue to serve within our labor force. Thank you. Our first item on the is public open time. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak on items that are not on today's agenda. Speakers will have 2 minutes each. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak at this time?
You can chat for everyone.
Is there anybody on Zoom?
There are 4 participants.
Okay, great.
Just seeing if anyone wants to raise their hand. Looks like you're good.
Item number 3, and I'm gonna, consideration of a draft meeting of minutes from July 13th. There is no staff report, but staff is available for questions. Any of the items come up from the commissioners. I'll now like to open it up to public comment on this item. Speakers have 2 minutes. There are no questions. I'm going to move on to close public comment and open it for a commission. Commissioner, you had a question?
Yeah, well, I have a maybe suggestion. I don't know. But in the minutes under the public open time, number 2, let's say it's 8 members address of the public address the commission. Is it possible, or do you think, I think it would be maybe a good idea to like brief, like 2 or 3 words what they brought up, just so that way someone reviewing the minutes be like, oh, okay, this people in the public talked about.
It's a question for Stephen.
A question, suggestion, comment.
I would say that will make for much longer minutes and more concrete. And then you could have people from the public saying that you didn't summarize what they had to say correctly.
Okay.
But those are not reasons to not do it. Those are just consequences of doing it.
Well, I think it's a reason to not do it if we already have a recording of the meeting in full available to the public.
Correct.
I'm happy to help the commission whichever way you decide to go.
Which is something I wanted to bring up, but I'm fine either way. It was a thought. Don't have strong feelings for it, but I thought, it might make it easier for someone, instead of watching the whole thing, to be like, oh, this is what people talked about.
I'm sure your question and comments are noted in the minutes. All right.
I just know when we did it at other public meetings, we would get exactly what John said.
Yeah. So
Members of the public saying, you did not adequately summarize, here's what I said. And then you've got, it's continuing, the next minutes are gonna be saying what it just.
It gets longer and longer.
makes sense.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So do I have a motion to approve the minutes from July 13th?
So move.
I have a first on the floor, a second. Thank you, Doug. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions, the motion carries. Whew. Number 4, updates and announcements. We have 3 items to cover. For each item, the commission will hear the updates and ask their questions. After the 3 updates, we'll open it for public comment and then hear commissioner comments after. Alderman Sheriff Liaison, Lieutenant Hugh Baker. Hello, Lou. Hugh.
Hello.
To start with this update and a presentation on the sheriff's current complaint process. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna go through the complaint process in an overview and just for a little bit of context. This is a course, an internal affairs investigation is a 40-hour course for supervisors. And then of the 80 hours they spend in supervisor school, about 20 hours of that is devoted to the internal investigation / supervision management process through the evaluation and management process itself. So this will be a much more brief overview of that. I'm going to move through it fairly quickly, so I leave enough room for questions and answers at the end. Does anybody mind if I sit here, or would you like me to stand? Okay. Thank you. So we have a statutory requirement to investigate complaints. We have that policy in our policy and procedure manual, and then we have mandated retention periods, and it depends on what the allegation of misconduct is. The minimum is 5 years, and then the maximum is 15 years or longer. Sheriff wants to hold them. One thing I'd like to recognize is the Inspector General's definition at your last meeting, an explanation of the difference between a concern and a complaint. A complaint is a complaint that addresses a specific issue of misconduct that is a violation of law or policy. And that policy could include sheriff's office policy, it could include county policy, because we're all county employees. We're subject to the personnel management regulations of the county, and of course, any law or statute of the state of California or the United States. Concerns are issues, maybe a complainant does not like the way that a particular incident or contact was handled, but there's no conduct of our employee that rises to the level of something that could be specifically disciplined as a result of misconduct. Those are concerns, they're not unimportant. They're often handled by supervisors. And I'm gonna come back to that in just a minute when I'm gonna talk about complaints that are sometimes handled by supervisors. If concerns are not able to be addressed at supervisory level, they'll typically come to myself or my partner. I have a partner that works with me in professional standards. If I'm not available, she will handle those concerns when they come in. We're not in there. Can you go to the next slide for me? I don't know if it's not advancing. So complaints are classified, formal complaints, those are a particular citizen either contacts us through some means. They can make that verbally to one of our employees. They're required to accept that complaint. They could call in and speak to our communications center. They could fill out an actual complaint form that we provide to the public. They can submit it to our internet website. It could really come to us. I think the sheriff kind of jokingly said that you could make a complaint on a cocktail napkin. If we receive that, we're going to investigate. Then there are special investigations. Those are internally generated. It could be a supervisor that became aware of conduct of one of their employees that violated policy or violated some statute. It could be an outside agency that maybe outside law enforcement agency that maybe had contact with our employee and then notified us of that, or the employee themselves might notify us. We do have a policy requirement. If you have contact with an outside law enforcement agency, you have to report that to your supervisor. So it's any employee within our organization that becomes aware of conduct that should be investigated, that gets forwarded through the chain of command, and usually a bureau captain will contact me and say, we want to initiate a special investigation. We covered citizen concerns already. We should talk for a minute about referred investigations. A referred investigation is, there are certain things that are covered by code of regulations, like Title 15 in the jail governs a lot of what we have to do in jail. And Title 15 identifies numerous aspects of the code of regulations that are grievable by incarcerated people. And so if a complaint comes in on an issue that's grievable under the Title 15 grievance process, we refer that back is not back to the individual, but we refer that back to the jail staff to conduct a grievance investigation and see if they can resolve that through the grievance process. There's a summary investigation. Those happen very rarely, but if someone has filed multiple complaints in the last 5 years and they are found to be unfounded or frivolous, we can do a summary investigation, which is a review of the complaint, maybe body camera footage if it exists, reports, reviewing reports and documents, and then based on just that level of investigation, we'll close out that complaint. An incomplete investigation is one where either the complainant decides that they don't want to proceed or they refuse to cooperate, and that becomes similar to a summary investigation. If we still look into it, if there's body cam video, we still watch the body cam video. It's oftentimes possible that because the complainant didn't want to speak with us directly, we may see some misconduct that is reported on body cam, and we would still address that. But at that point, once we've done that review, it becomes an incomplete investigation. If we can't independently sustain any misconduct, then we move on. Next slide, please. So we're looking here. Sources of complaints, we've kind of already covered a lot of this. They can come from members of the public, they can come from department employees, supervisors can initiate complaints, whether they come in anonymously or someone can make a complaint on behalf of another person. And we also get claims that don't come in as a complaint specifically, but a county claim will be filed with county counsel's office or rather with county executive's office. And then it gets forwarded to us for investigation. If that claim includes an allegation of misconduct, it will be investigated as a complaint investigation. I kind of already covered all this. We take complaints however they come. So the first step is in an investigation is a screening process. So usually they come to me. That's my specific function in the organization. So they'll come to me, I review it, see if I can identify the specific allegations and really kind of determine what the misconduct alleged is. If there's evidence that I'm aware of at that time, if there's body cam video, police reports, if there's a statement, a written statement, sometimes we have written statements either from fellow employees or we have a statement from the complainant. I preserve all that evidence. I upload it into our evidence system. I mark it as confidential, and I initiate what we call a standard report that is then assigned out to a sergeant for investigation. The investigator will interview witnesses, interview the subject of the investigation, or subjects, or sometimes multiple employees. They document their findings by writing a report. That report is held in our Axon standards, which is a module of our evidence system that does reporting. And then they'll make a recommendation based on, or they'll have a conclusion based on the evidence. They'll look at the evidence they collect in their investigation and they'll say, on this specific allegation, there is the following evidence supports a finding of sustained. And that's based on the investigator's evaluation of the evidence as it meets the standard of proof, which is preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not. So if that is their conclusion, they forward it up the chain of command, it comes to me, I review it, confirm that their conclusions are in fact correct, and then I make a recommendation of a finding, sustained, exonerated, etc., which we'll go over in a minute. And that goes to the bureau captain. The bureau captain either sends it back and says you need to do more investigation, or I disagree and the finding should be different, or they concur with the recommendation and it goes to the undersheriff. If we're going to discipline formally, the undersheriff will issue what's called the notice of intent to discipline. That goes directly to the employee and their representative. And it basically states, based on this evidence, it is our intention to discipline you formally as a result of this. Next slide, please. When we do the notice, particularly the initial notice, we have to observe the peace officer's bill of rights. And under what we call POBAR. And under POBAR, we have to notify them of the nature of the allegations, and the notice has to be sufficient to give them the opportunity to determine whether or not they want to have a representative, who that representative should be, and to have enough idea as to what the scope of the investigation is so that they can prepare for their administrative. The POBAR governs their rights for the interrogation interview and their representation rights. And it sets timeframe requirements. So when we talk about having to be done within 1 year, that's the basic timeframe requirement. From the date we become aware of an allegation of misconduct, we have to issue that notice of intent to discipline within 1 year of the date that we became aware. There are some exceptions. If there's a criminal investigation, for example, let's say there's an outside agency conducting a criminal investigation, we can do what's called holding that until that investigation is complete. And if if this happens in custody deaths, where we have an outside coroner's investigation and we have an outside criminal investigation, oftentimes that won't all come together until around the 1 year mark. So we can extend that in certain circumstances. Next slide. Oh, that time went. Axon Standards is just our electronic report writing system, and it's our evidence collection system. So it stores all of this evidence and all of this report writing on an off-site server in a secure location that we have a contract with Axon to provide us. It also allows us to make sure that we're meeting our retention standards for how long we're retaining these records. So dispositions, this is a question that comes up a lot. These are our dispositions. We can say that the investigation was unfounded. Whatever the alleged act was, we determined it never actually. We can have a sustained finding, which means we believe that the allegation of misconduct occurred, that the specific act or omission occurred, and that there's substantial evidence to support that. We can have an exonerated status, which then, or disposition, which says, yes, the specific alleged conduct occurred, but that alleged conduct was within law and policy that we didn't violate anything. So in other words, the employee did it, but they were correct. Then we have a not sustained finding, and the not sustained finding was probably the most challenging one of all, because that's where the evidence isn't, there's some evidence there, but it's not really conclusive. And we have some question or doubt as to whether or not we can meet our burden of proof in front of an adjudicating body, such as the Personnel Commission. So we want to, if we're going to sustain an allegation and discipline an employee, and they're going to appeal that, the first step of appeal goes to the Personnel Commission. And if the Personnel Commission doesn't believe we met our standard of proof, they'll overturn the discipline. And then the last one is that preferred disposition that I talked about, where there's another process that's more appropriate for handling it, like the grievance process. I went through all of these. So let's talk a little bit about what corrective action and discipline looks like. So when I get an allegation of misconduct, it comes to me, and I look at it and I say, you know, this is an allegation of actual misconduct. There's something that might have been done incorrectly or might have violated something. But I'm confident that it's not likely going to rise to the level of actually formal discipline, where we do something at the level of a suspension without pay or above. I will oftentimes send that to their immediate supervisor and say, please contact the complainant and work through this process with the complainant and see if you can resolve this at the supervisory level. The reason I do that is because we as supervisors are allowed great latitude to counsel, document in our evaluation system, come up with, ask for additional training, come up with a lot of ways to address corrective action that doesn't involve formal discipline. And then all of those rights that the Peace Officers Bill of Rights protects don't apply. So supervisors have a really golden opportunity to mentor and develop their team without it having to be formal discipline. And that is, we call that counseling or documented counseling. That's when they actually write it up and they put that in the person's evaluation. An oral reprimand, that can be an oral reprimand as long as we're not taking any pay from them. It's not formal discipline, and all of those POBAR rights don't attach. And then additional training. Now, if we do a full investigation, we could come to this exact same conclusion. And that's why sometimes heading that off at the pass is the best route. Sometimes the complainant's not interested in that. They want a formal investigation, and we will give them a formal investigation if that's what they desire. Disciplinary action that goes above those things there, formal written reprimand, essentially a letter from the sheriff saying you violated these policies and you're admonished not to do it again. You have a transfer or reassignment. You can be moved out of your assignment. Maybe somebody is a field training officer. Maybe they hold a specialty training position. They can be removed from those positions. They could have a pay. Which is there's basically a suspension, an unpaid suspension. They could lose leave time from their vacation bank. They could have a reduction in pay grade. Someone is a sergeant or a lieutenant, they could be demoted back to sergeant or back to lieutenant. And of course, termination would be the ultimate. I should talk about reduction in pay grade. There is a sanction that can involve, there are steps of pay, usually from 1 to 5. And say you're at a step 5, you could be moved down to a step 4 for 3 months or 6 months, for example. That one I've only seen used once in the 7 years that I've been with the sheriff's office. Post is informed of the following. So there are certain conditions, certain misconduct acts that if we have to notify Post. Dishonesty, abuse of power, physical abuse, sexual assault, bias, violation of criminal law, participating in a law enforcement gang, failure to cooperate, and failure to intercede. So if excessive force is being used and there's a failure to intercede and stop that, we have to report that we're investigating that to Post. Also, if anybody resigns or is terminated, we have to notify Post of that as well, and they keep track of it. Post has the ability on its own to investigate any of these acts of misconduct and render a finding where they decertify the person's certification to be a peace officer. So that would just go away. It would no longer be able to function anywhere in the state as a peace officer. Information has to be reported to Post within 10 days. Myself and my partner and our captain have access to Post's Mark 43 system. We report that electronically. At the conclusion of our investigation, we update Post to what our findings were. Post, if it's one of those categories of decertification, Post conducts their own investigation, makes a recommendation as to whether or not to decertify. And then if the action is taken and the decertification process proceeds, they'll let us know that the person cannot be a peace officer anymore in the state. And that is a link there to Post's website on decertification if you're more interested in that process.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but so is Post are those people from the Marion County Sheriff's Office on the Post committee, or is it a separate?
No, it's a separate entity. The Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training is a commission that stands alone independently, and it certifies all of the training for peace officers in the entire state, as well as our certification to hold office. I got you.
Is Post accessible to other states to take a look at? So if I'm gonna go live here and I've been kicked out of here and I go to Chicago, I want to be an officer, can they look it up?
I believe they can, but I'm not 100% certain that they have the capacity to do that. They do have the capacity to contact the former employee agency. So let's say it's us, it's our deputy and they've been decertified. And they apply at Chicago PD and they want to go work there. Chicago typically would say, we'd like to see this person's personnel file. And if they signed a waiver, we'll let them see the file and that will include why they're no longer working for us. Questions? I know it's a lot.
Seems like it's one point of failure, so you make the decision if something's gonna go forward?
No. I make the decision that falls into the category of a concern or a complaint. And then if it's a something that I believe can be resolved by the primary supervisor, then I'll refer it to them. If that doesn't work, maybe the person doesn't want that. They're like, hey, I want this formal investigated. Then it we formally investigate. So it's not solely my decision.
Yes, Tom.
Couple of questions. One, and I'm sorry if you addressed this and I missed it. Can you address kind of the when, to what extent you factor in potential conflicts of interest as part of an investigation? Like, who conducts the investigation? Are you having a supervisor do it, or I'm familiar in the private sector, obviously investigations, they're very, try to be sensitive to how it's perceived and that there isn't somebody that has maybe a personal relationship or what have you involved in it. Could you maybe address that? Who conducts it? How is that person selected? What kind of training does the investigator have? That sort of thing.
Yes, so I'm glad you asked that question. I'll kind of take it in two parts. The first part regarding who investigates and what happens if there's some kind of a potential of interest. So I have 6 sergeants that conduct internal affairs investigations in that regard. But that's a collateral assignment for them, meaning that they're full-time sergeants. 2 are detective sergeants, 2 are in the professional standards unit, 1 is in patrol, and 1 is in jail. So they have full-time jobs outside of doing all this wonderful stuff. So there are times that investigation may be more complex, or it might involve a conflict of interest. And in those instances, we have gone outside of the agency to an independent firm that conducts these investigations. That's not a decision that I make. That's not a decision I make. That decision comes from the sheriff and undersheriff. And we have one of those open currently. We're using an outside agency to investigate. And that could be because of a conflict of interest, or it could just be that our personnel don't have the bandwidth, so to speak, to handle that investigation. The second part of your question about the training. So the training, I said there's a 40-hour course in internal affairs investigation. So most sergeants will go through that course. A little over a year ago, 18 months-ish, the sheriff made the decision that these investigations were more critical than we could just have somebody that went to a 40-hour course and maybe has never done one. They shouldn't maybe be doing them on a basis. So that's why we formed that group of 6 investigators that essentially do 90% of all the investigations. And they go to a fair amount of training. As I mentioned, 2 are detective sergeants. They already have an investigative background, and that's their job. They're doing it every day. 2, 3, the other 3 of the other 4 come from an investigative background. They were detectives. 1 is not. So we try to select people and send them to as much training. That for me, there's no amount of training that isn't important. If there's a class that's available that's put on this, even though they may have done 10 investigations and done a great job, I push them to go to that class. I think that's exactly it.
No, thank you. And so related to that, then you mentioned that there at least one you have outstanding that you have now that's gone outside. Someone curious on, are there standards or procedures for how you determine when to send it out, or is it more a discretionary decision by the leadership of the sheriff's department?
It is a discretionary decision. There isn't a set of facts or a policy that indicates a set of circumstances that dictates that. It's having an understanding that there could be a conflict. We have referred investigations in the past to human resources to conduct the investigation.
Yeah, county, human.
County. Right, and again, that is discretionary, and that is not a decision I can make at my level, otherwise I recommend it. That would ultimately be the sheriff, the under sheriff. And there's a cost factor involved, right? So when you hire out, maybe not with HR, but if you hire out a private firm, that's gonna be an expense against the sheriff's budget, so that's not a decision I can make.
And are there standards or procedures for how long the investigation should take? I mean, as you know, like from an investigation, the longer maybe it goes on, there's less likely, there's more likelihood of evidence being destroyed or people forgetting their stories or what have you. So are there procedures for how quickly the investigation should be conducted and take? And also, is there a requirement for a written report of the outcome of the investigation? And do we have written reports from every investigation that's been taken or conducted?
So in terms of timelines, you're referring to all investigations or just the inside or outside? Oh, okay. So regardless of whether it's an internal or we contract it out, either way, all of those requirements, peace officers' procedural bill of rights and the time statute, all of that applies. It all still has to be done according to the law. In terms of internal investigations, our policy, which I think you were provided as part of the packet, our policy has an initial 30-day requirement. I'm going to tell you that that's under review right now. My desire is that we extend that out a little bit. Ultimately, the sheriff decides on policy, not me, but that's my recommendation. And the reason being is in 30 days, so I become aware of a violation or an allegation of misconduct today. I have to do all of that research, the background, figure out what the allegations are, put that together, then assign it out to an investigator. If the investigator that I assign it out to doesn't come back to work until Thursday, that's the first day they get to work on it. They then have to compile the notice and notice the employee. If that employee doesn't return work until Sunday, we've now expired 6 days, right, of that 30 days. Now we're down to 24 days. Then they have to reach out. This is one representation. They have to reach out and call their union law firm. Their union law firm says, yes, we're providing you representation in that case. This is your assigned attorney. And now you're coordinating with an attorney for a date to meet and do an interview. And that is sometimes a long process because they have other clients. So getting it all done in 30 days is a little ambitious, I think. And so rather than having that in the policy and never getting it done in 30 days, I'd rather see that at 90 or maybe 120 days. And then we're sticking to that, most of the time, unless there are really extenuating circumstances.
That's your recommendation or your thinking, but right now the procedure.
Days. And what typically happens is they get to the 30-day mark, they ask me for an extension. I say, why do you need an extension? I've been able to schedule with the attorney. Okay.
And sorry, just a couple of other quick questions, hopefully related to this. So also, you talked about the post reporting.
Yes.
What type of reporting is given to, or information is given to, say, a complainant who lodged a complaint?
Yeah. So let me just park that for 1 second and come back to your previous question on reporting. Everything we do is documented in Axon standards. So there is a formal written report that is submitted that documents everything the investigator did. All interviews are recorded. They're all uploaded. They're stored as attached to that investigation. In terms of reporting back to a complainant, they receive a letter at the end of the process and they're advised as to what the outcome was. But that is the extent of the information they get.
They're advised as to what, like either it's unfounded or just
the disposition,
a succinct little disposition.
It is very succinct.
And if somebody wanted access to get more information, is there a process like a Public Records Act request? Is it subject to that or anything? Do you know?
Those files are confidential by state law. You enforce the scope of your responsibilities as commissioners at some point. The Inspector General would see them. And you go through that process, through your process here, along with the inspector general. But there are aspects of those files that are confidential that no one will ever be able to do.
And the last question, maybe you, and I understand there are gonna be confidentiality issues here, so I'm not asking specific information on specific incidents, but are you able to identify like how many findings of serious misconduct have been at some period of time, in the last 5 years or something?
Yeah, I could report out on that for you. There's no issue with looking at dispositions and giving you a report out on what the dispositions have been, or what the numbers of complaints, external, what the numbers internal, all that we log and track that, and I'd be happy to report out.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Commissioner. Thank you, Lieutenant. Commissioner Chan, and then Sarah is next.
Oh, sorry. You're next.
No, you go.
Okay. To follow up on some of those questions, for the complainant, do you give the progress updates? Or we only hear that you've received the report and then nothing until this is it?
So there's no specific policy requirement to provide those policies. If I'm doing an investigation on a complaint with an outside complainant, I typically give them status updates, because otherwise, in a few months, they don't know what's going on. But that's not mandated currently. I think it's a practice, but it's not a policy. As far as internally, I provide the captains a monthly status of where all of things are. So we have 3 bureaus, each one is mandated. They get a status update as to where the investigations occurring within the bureau are on a monthly basis. Report that out so that they can push it along.
If you decide that the complaint is best resolved through that informal channel, does the complainant find that out?
Yes. So that's not necessarily just our decision. That's a decision that we reach out and have a conversation about it. And if they are insisting of having a formal investigation, I shouldn't say that it could never happen that might be overruled and they get a summary investigation. But the overwhelming majority of the time, if they want a full investigation, they're going to get a full investigation. And that conversation does take place with the complainant.
My last question is, this seems very much geared probably appropriately to investigations of an individual officer that come. What do you get complaints that are not person specific, generalized, like I just don't like how the department does X, and if so, how does that flow through this process?
So that would be more in line with a concern. If there isn't a specific act of misconduct that we can attach to an employee or a group of 2 or 3 people, but if we can't attach a specific allegation of misconduct to an employee or a group of employees, maybe they follow policy, but they don't like our policy. So that gets written up and is submitted to the sheriff, because the sheriff is the determiner of the policy. The sheriff may modify the policy, may not modify the policy. I know the sheriff oftentimes responds to community members directly when they have those concerns, because he will say, I appreciate your concern. This is why policy is the way it is, and I've decided not to change. He usually makes the contact. He does, he's the boss, and he does what he feels is appropriate. But I know for a fact, a lot of times he directs those right back to the original complainant and has that conversation.
And what's your estimate, general ballpark, how many are employee specific versus generalized?
I would say the majority are misconduct specific, and I should put this caveat in there. So I was a sergeant for 26 years. In that time, I probably handled hundreds of complaints, and we would handle a call. People would be upset. They would call communications, our dispatch center. Dispatch would build a call in our electronic system, send it to me, and that this person has an issue with what happened. I would call them back, and we would talk about it. Sometimes they just want to vent about it. Sometimes they have a concern about something that was done and we talk about that. Sometimes they want to come in and sit down and watch the body cam video with me. I'm fine with that. We would do that. If at the end of all of that, they were satisfied with my proposed solution, which might be sitting my deputy down and counseling them and documenting that, that would end that complaint. So I can't speak to those numbers because I don't have. But the ones that come to me, the majority, we end up doing a formal investigation. Thank you.
Commissioner McAvoy.
Yeah, on that note, are the ones that might go to sheriff or that aren't, like person or a person specific misconduct, do those get documented?
If they came in to us, like, so again, if somebody emails the sheriff directly and he responds to their email, I don't know about that. But if he gets an email directly from a community member and he sends it to the captain sends it to me and says, what's going on? Then I will probably find out what happened, but I don't track those. If somebody communicates directly with the sheriff, that's outside of the scope of my involvement.
Okay. And then get ready, I have lots of questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Are there different, so you have the formal and the informal, and is it, they all go through that same complaint process and then it's determined where they fit in and you talk to the complainant and that's where all that, or is there a different avenue if something is like an informal?
So the informal, if you will, is somebody calling a supervisor directly. Maybe something happened in the jail and the person is released, but they're not happy with what happened while they're in jail. They may call back and they may speak to a supervisor directly and say, hey, I had an issue with this deputy. And that might get resolved directly with that supervisor. So then I don't have any involvement in that process, right?
So your involvement is through this formal complaint process?
Yes.
Okay. And then, when you were talking about, the administrative investigations in that evidence collection part where you say they consider the appropriateness of administrative leave. Is there a standard for like what defines appropriateness?
No. Typically, if the discipline is going to be, it's going to result, if the allegation is something that could result in termination, that is a case where the sheriff will consider administrative leave. But again, putting somebody on administrative leave triggers additional expenses for the department, and that's outside the scope of my ability to.
So the sheriff is the one that determines the appropriateness?
Yes.
Okay. So going back to Tom kind of touched on this about time frame requirements, and maybe excuse me if I missed it, but while there is an investigation that's going on and that 1 year can be extended, is there a maximum to how much it can be extended, or it's pending the resolution of the investigation?
It can only be extended as far as what's reasonably necessary to conduct, say, for example, a criminal investigation. So we park the administrative investigation.
Okay.
A serious use of force or officer-involved shooting is another good example. While there's a criminal investigation pending, we're not going to jump in the middle of the criminal investigation. Our administrative investigation is not going to jump in the middle of that. We're going to allow the criminal investigators to work their case completely, and that could take 6 months. And it might take another 3, 4, 5, 6 months for us to finish administratively, but we get to extend that time while we're waiting for the criminal investigation.
And then, so there's an appeal process for an employee that doesn't find the result satisfactory. Is there any avenue that a complainant can take if they are unsatisfied with the outcome?
They can appeal to the sheriff directly.
So there is
Always have the ability, or the captain, the bureau captain. I would typically refer them to the bureau captain. And my experience is our bureau captains are very willing to have somebody come in and sit down with them and go over all the reasons why they don't feel that the disposition was correct.
Okay, and does that trigger like an additional, okay.
Good.
And then, are all Title 15 complaints reported to post? Because would that be considered a violation of law?
If it's a grievable issue under Title 15. So there are some things that might be grievable under Title 15 and might actually be an allegation of misconduct.
Okay.
So those would probably be handled both ways, right? So like a use of force. A use of force, we're always going to review that in our internal process, whether there's a grievance or not.
Mhm.
But if it's just a grievance, there's no real allegation. It's a good example is a classification issue. I'm classified as protected custody, but I don't want to be in protected custody. And I think you guys will classify. That's a grievable issue. It's not a personnel issue, unless during that classification process, a deputy said something to the incarcerated person that was curious or that was offensive in some way, that demonstrated bias. If that happens, that's going to be investigated internally by the internal investigation process.
Okay. And then my last question is very short. Is there a complaint process form in languages other than English?
The only process, the only complaint pamphlets, which I think you guys got links to them, but those are, as far as I know, only available in English or Spanish. However, if somebody speaks a different language, we do have the ability to use interpreters to walk them through the process of filling out a complaint or making a statement to us. Same thing that if we were to interview them, we would use an appropriate interpreter to articulate that better.
And is that stated on the complaint process?
I do not believe it is.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Sandoval.
I'm just gonna, I don't understand how the administrative process versus the criminal process works, and like at what point you're getting an allegation that is a criminal allegation. So you open a complaint and you decide, okay, this is a criminal allegation.
Right.
And you then, does the sheriff's office still handle like the criminal portion? Are you referring it out to maybe other law enforcement? How, and then you said the administrative process maybe like stops and waits for the criminal, so how does that interact?
So let me give you this example. Let's say that a deputy is responding to a call, lights and sirens, and they have authority under the vehicle code. In that circumstance, they can violate vehicle code traffic law, right? But they still have to drive with due regard for the safety of everyone on the road. Like they have this kind of guiding principle of you can't forget about people's safety. So let's say they get in an accident in that circumstance. We're going to ask an outside law enforcement agency, might be the California Highway Patrol, it could be San Francisco Police Department, conduct a crash investigation and give us a finding as to whether or not if the officer may be criminally liable. Okay, so we kind of shadow the criminal investigative process, but where we can mandate, we can compel an interview or interrogation. In the criminal investigation, they can't waive the Miranda rights, make a statement. They do when we interview. Because we give them we give them Miranda, they invoke, and we give them a secondary live order where we say, okay, none of this music is criminally, but now we want to go back. So the two investigations are kind of parallel. But if we're waiting for a result, maybe we're waiting for an opinion from the DA's office, whether or not that charges, then we have the ability to hold the time frame of our administrative investigation.
The criminal portion, the sheriff's office never handle it.
No, we're not investigating ourselves.
Okay. That's all I have. Okay.
We want to thank you, that was, we're in their room.
Yeah, well, I apologize for the link, but I'm glad I'm to you.
That little, when,
Commissioner Gaffney,
yeah,
okay.
when, Winston asked about the tracking, so if a person either fill out this complaint or they call in, when you go to, you order something on Amazon and it shows, I ordered this day, it's here until it's finished. The tracking system, you know, like, what do they get? Or, like, they would get a copy of this complaint and
So
give them a copy or stamp it and say, I received this day. And
yeah, so if they file a paper complaint, if they file an electronic complaint, obviously there's a record that we received it. Because it goes through the internet and it shows that we received it. And I get an email, and I'm not the only one. There's checks and balances. There's people other than me that get the same email that says this person made a call. In terms of the telephone calls, if they come into our communications center, that's documented. you might recall, I said they build a call, right? So they give it a number and they build a call and then it goes out to the supervisor and the supervisor has to enter a disposition. I talk to the person, this is how we decide to handle it. Those are recorded in our computer aided dispatch system. In terms of formal investigations, if they make their way to me, I give them a number, I give them an internal number. So for example, complaint number 26-5. And then they get an Axon number also, and they all go to that Axon. The piece that might be missing there is if they call directly to the jail and talk to a sergeant, there probably is nothing that documents. So there are tracking systems in place, but it isn't universal. Just make the best answer to your question.
And then, so again, you track it and say 2 months from now and I haven't heard anything, how would that person make the complaint? You know,
That they hadn't heard anything?
yeah, or where am I in this process?
Yeah, so I would offer myself up, like if there are members of the community listening, or they see this at some point and they're curious about that question, or you have that question, I would say contact me directly, and I will get to the bottom of it. If I know where it is, I'll just tell you where we're at in the process. If I don't, I'll reach out to wherever that complaint is in the process, whoever's handling it, and I'll find out where it's at, and then I'll have that person contact the complaint. That's the best right now for the process that we have in place and what our policy is. That's the best advice I can give. And I don't ever mind contacting by people who want to know what they're happening.
And then how many complaints have the sheriff's department handled in the last 3 years?
3 years, I don't know off the top of my head. I can tell you we're formal complaints were at 18 for 2026, and there were 9 that are internally generated. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, and to the department network from this internet address, but my recollection is there were fewer last year, but in the year prior in 2024. So it ebbs and it flows. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the number went up a little bit because of you all, because there's an outside set of eyes now looking at what we do. So people may feel, that the process has a greater degree of maybe legitimacy than they thought before. So that wouldn't surprise me, and I would be okay with it.
Well, I want to thank you, Lieutenant Baker.
Yeah,
This
you
was
call me-
really, really helpful. This is really helpful for us, and I know you're available. I take pride. I'm happy that someone calls me as a commissioner to say, what do? I put a complaint in a few weeks ago and I haven't heard anything. I can say you should reach out to the lieutenant.
Yes. Yes.
So
They
they
can
may-
call me or email me directly.
Or John.
Or
Yeah.
they can reach out. John communicates with me regularly.
Correct.
Things he.
But you've given me a tool.
Yes.
You know what I'm
Yes,
saying?
absolutely.
I don't have to say, oh, I don't know, you know. So we're gonna move on to item number B, which is our update from our Inspector General, John Alden.
Sure, thank you. First, I want to say thank you for moving this meeting date. I appreciate that. I have a few things for you. One is a few items that I would highlight from the presentation we just heard. There's a lot of material in there, and when we get to the point where this commission is looking at individual cases, after we have an operational review, a good ways down the pipe. But when we get there, probably be useful for each of you to look over this training again. There's just a lot of material in there. It's been my experience that when I'm training people in law enforcement to use these tools, it takes them a while to pick them up. Same with attorneys that I trained about how to use these tools. It's a lot of material. And some of the items in particular can be a little tricky, like the findings, sustained, not sustained, exonerated, segregation. But for tonight, I want to highlight for you 3 things that I hope you'll think about over the next year. One is that 1-year deadline that you heard about for the sheriff's office to notify a deputy that they want to discipline them. So when we are creating a system for you all to weigh in on some of these cases, if your input back to the sheriff persuades the sheriff to change his position about a case, that is only going to result in a change in the disciplinary outcome if you've gotten that feedback back to the sheriff long before that 1-year deadline. So if you're looking at a case that's 13 months old, even if you have a great argument about why the discipline should be different or why the conclusion of the finding should be different in cases, there is no legal way for anybody in the county to take action on your advice. So think about that a year from now as we start looking at some of these cases. These deadlines are hard and fast, and there is absolutely no remedy for missing them. So you will sometimes feel some time pressure in that regard. And that is just a way that the system is set up throughout the entire state, every single oversight agent. Some people find that surprising. In other fields of public employment, those deadlines are often even shorter than 1 year. And while there are 8 specific exceptions to that 1-year rule, if you want to use any of them, you have to have the evidence that proves that they apply. And so that makes your case doubly hard, because in addition to proving that the result you want is the right result, you also have the burden of proving that that exception to the 1-year rule applied. So even if you think there's an exception to the 1-year rule, it's a lot of extra work for you to have to prove that it applies. So one of the things I expect I will be doing in the future is letting you know, here is the deadline for making a decision about this case. If you want to change the finding, you want to convince the sheriff to go from exonerated to sustained, for example. You'll need to make sure you get that information to the sheriff way in advance. So think about that a little bit. Tight deadlines. There was a question from one of the commissioners about whether there's some outer deadline with you stack up all these tolling mechanisms to go past the 1 year. Is there some point at which there's some ultimate deadline past that? I think that might have been Mr. McAvoy. There isn't really one in statute. Theoretically, one gets to a point where so much time has elapsed that trying to discipline the deputy may be unfair to the deputy, not be able to mount a defense because witnesses are no longer available or evidence has been destroyed. That doesn't come up very often. So you're very unlikely to have to deal with that. A second thing that I hope you'll think about between now and when we start working on these cases some more are these rules from Penal Code Section 832.5 and 2.7 verbals of that, getting out what happens in these cases. So if we think back to the 1960s and the 1970s, there was a lot of tension in the state and around this country between community and police, right? We had the anti-war movement, we had the Summer of Love, we had, in addition to that, social movements, especially here in California, that were often at odds with police, like Black Panthers, Weathermen, the time of significant discord between community and police. And during that time, many people in California complained police and sheriffs were not taking seriously complaints that the public had about individual deputies or police officers. And at that same time, police and sheriffs were complaining. We're getting complaints all the time. And some of them are ones that really are about just not liking police or sheriff's deputies as opposed to substantive complaints about us, and it makes us look bad unfairly. Totally different perspectives, right? You can see how those two perspectives are quite at odds. So at the time, the legislature came up with a compromise, which was they created the laws you heard about earlier, Penal Code Section 832.5 and 0.7, that explicitly require law enforcement agencies to always investigate complaints about their deputies or police officers. So now California agencies must do an investigation, must document it, and must keep that for the time periods you heard about earlier. Not every state has that rule. And the flip side of that compromise was that the legislature said they would make those investigations confidential personnel records for each of the deputies or officers. That's not true in all other states either. So here in California, we have this unusual system where agencies absolutely must investigate complaints and keep records about them. But the investigations are personnel records and therefore generally not available to the public. So I think Commissioner McInerney, you might have been asking, like, can you use Public Records Act request to get to those investigations? Absolutely not. Just full bar across the board. Until just a couple of years ago, there are a small number of cases that are now available to the public. And as a general rule, there are ones such as fatal uses of force, like a deputy or a police officer actually killing someone in line of duty. And then certain kinds of cases with sustained findings by the law enforcement agency or by an oversight agency, like sustained cases of sexual assault or sustained cases of dishonesty are two examples. So there's a very, very, very small set of cases where the complainant can actually find out everything about the case. And most of the time, the complainant can't find out really much of anything, except for this one exception that's listed in those same penal code statutes I mentioned earlier. That says the complainant can be told what the outcome was, what was the finding that was reached, how that was the findings you saw, sustained, not sustained, exonerated, etc. They're allowed to do that. Those rules are going to apply to your work too. So there will probably be less than you can get back to complainants, that you can tell complainants, than you would probably like in this process. And this has been the case in California now for about 50 years. Until, as I mentioned a minute or two ago, a small number of exceptions were created, only just in the last 5 years or so. So we have this unique body of law in California that, for better or for worse, does make it harder for you all to communicate with complainants about what happens in your reviews, which is why you're going to notice that when you do get to the point where you can review cases, that's going to be what's called a closed session. The public will not be able to see your work.
You said it was 3 things. Is that 2?
That's 2. The last one is there's an opportunity here, which is you were hearing about how sometimes people will make a complaint or they'll raise a concern about a deputy or police officer, and the conclusion that law enforcement reaches, well, they were doing exactly what they're told to do in their policy or law, but that policy or law is not popular or not supported by that particular complainant, maybe by multiple complainants. I think one of the greatest opportunities for commissions like yours is to flag those spaces and to suggest changes in policy that might cause the way that law enforcement is behaving in the community to land better with community, to meet community expectations better. So I've just mentioned 2 ways in which your work might be frustrated. But this third one, I think, is your big opportunity and the place where you can really make the most change. So I hope you'll think about those over the next year. Think of a lot about policy issues you can work on even before we have an operational agreement in this next year, like the surveillance technologies we've been talking about. Great opportunity for you there. So in addition to that, I just wanted to say we've had a lot of outreach going. Since I saw you last, I've been asked to come to events in Marin City and Nevada and West Marin, and gotten out there and started meeting more and more people in the public who I think are really interested in you and your work. I know several of you made it to the Coffee with the Cop event in Marin City, which I think is great. In addition to that, I'm sure we're going to see a lot more events out into the future, and if any of you come across events that you think would be good for us to attend, let me know. I find for me individually, it's particularly useful to be at events with groups that have interest in the subject matter, talk to them at some length about what it is that you all are doing and what it is that I'm doing. So if there are people who are also going to be ambassadors out to the rest of the community, tell more people about what we're doing, I think that's great. I had a chance to talk to the Marin Forum a while back, and I think everyone there was going back out to their connections, their communities, and talking more about what we do. So if you come across opportunities like that, maybe with groups that you're a part of, I hope you'll pass that on. But in addition to that, events where the public is just out and about, you might be interested in, say, tabling or meeting and greeting people. I think that's especially good for commissioners. We continue to work on the operational agreement. I'm pleased to say we've made a lot of progress on that since I talked to you last. Lieutenant Baker and I have already started doing some work on that. One of the things we were thinking is that it might be good for actually the two of us to make a presentation to this commission at your next meeting. If that needs to be approval of the chair and is something that sounds like it's got support from the commissioners when we talk about future agenda items later tonight. Specifically about what operational agreements look like and what you can expect around the timeline and how to talk about those. I know I've gotten that question from a lot of commissioners, and many of us have individually had conversations about that. And I think that would be a really useful presentation for you all. And an opportunity for you all to give some feedback to me about what you might want to see in an operational agreement. And I hope that tonight's presentation from Lieutenant Baker helps you start thinking about that a little bit. So assuming we have that on our next agenda, hope you'll bring some thoughts and comments about what you'd like to see happen. Finally, training. One of the training ideas that I know we've been talking about for a little bit are tours of the jail. And so Lieutenant Baker and I talked a bit about how we could facilitate some tours of the jail. We'd like to put together a doodle poll for members of the commission about when you might be available in the next, say, 6 weeks or so to do a jail tour. We'd like to get you in there in groups of less than 5. As we talked about it, Lieutenant Baker pointed out that given the way the daily schedule runs at the jail, the easiest opportunities to have you do a tour that's easiest for their staff, but also the easiest for you to look around and see, what it's really like, where you're not going to have some kind of a challenge getting into a room because people are, or the detained people at the jail around or the like. It's going to be in the morning between breakfast and lunch, or in the afternoon between lunch and dinner. We could do some evening tours too, if that's needed. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you tonight is, do any of you have scheduling issues such that you really definitely need an evening tour? It's a little bit harder for us to work out, but Lieutenant and I could figure that out if that's needed. Any feedback for me?
How long is the tour?
Make it a couple hours.
Is it weekdays?
No,
Weekends?
Yeah, we do hours.
Whatever time. Okay.
I'm just saying 2 hours. What would that entail?
You'd be surprised how big that jail is on the inside. It looks small when you look at the hill, but there's actually a lot in there. And then in addition to that, we want to make sure there's an opportunity for you to meet some of the staff and ask them questions. So you're not just walked through and said, look over here, look over there, look over here. There's actually a chance to interact a little. So that would include probably a conversation at the beginning about what some of the rules are going to be in the jail, making sure you're comfortable. If there's anything that might make any one of you uncomfortable in the jail, it's an opportunity to talk about that, sort of get yourself oriented to the space, but also then ask about what you're seeing and why you're seeing it and express interest in whatever it is you individually might want to see. So each tour could be a little bit different depending on what those commissioners on that day really want to learn more about. So the idea is to make it as tailored to you individually as possible, understanding that, there are security and operation concerns in the jail. We can't just walk around.
So let me go ahead and formally do this. So thank you, John, for your updates, and open up the floor to commissioners for questions on any of the
Yeah, hey, John, so would you anticipate offering both afternoon session and morning sessions for the tours? Are you going to be
Sure, we could.
more one week?
We could do that.
Okay. Afternoon is easier for me, but
Okay.
Anybody else?
Couple things. Did you have, based on your experience as Lieutenant Baker went through the complaint process, did you have thoughts in terms of what he's outlined there? Is that consistent generally with sort of the, best practices isn't maybe the best word, but with the practice of conducting investigations by other agencies?
Yes, a lot of the processes he described are required by state law. So those are consistent across at least California agencies. Maybe different in another state, but consistent with California agencies. I thought his point about 30 days not being enough to finish an investigation was spot on. I don't know any California agency that can accomplish that right now. And part of that is because of the noticing process that's required under POBRA to let a deputy or police officer know that they're going to be interviewed and do that interview in a way that complies with those rules. Usually it takes a few months to strike that. So when you talked about moving that timeline on a little longer, I thought that made a lot of sense. That was one way in which current policy is different than what I've seen in other places. 30-day was unrealistic. That is of course up to the sheriff, but if you were to choose to set a longer time period, I think that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, coming good timing on this policy.
If you want to, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then the fact that they have a process for flagging cases that might have a conflict, I think is a positive. That's an emerging best practice. Not everybody does that, but I think it's a strong best practice.
One thing I was wondering on that is, it didn't sound like that there's like a, maybe I misunderstood, that there's like a definition of what's a conflict and how you determine what constitutes a conflict. And it sounds like it's a discretionary decision by leadership. Is that consistent with kind of what normally happens?
Yeah, generally, yes. There are a small number of agencies that have a very explicit detailed policy. The Oakland Police Department, for example, has an explicit form that each investigator fills out, lists possible sources of conflict that assigned investigator has to sign if they don't have any of those conflicts. That's a more robust, detailed, formalized process than we see in other places.
Yeah. And the other thing I was wondering about was who conducts the training or the experience of the investigator, and are there agencies that have maybe more dedicated resources to it, like a dedicated investigator, somebody that's got a lot of training on best practices with respect to investigations versus having somebody that's part of their job and they're juggling a bunch of other work that they're doing while doing an investigation. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I would say there that the biggest difference I see between agencies on whether someone is assigned long-term to just do internal affairs investigations or has this split assignment, as you're going to play, is the overall size of the agency.
Yeah.
So if you look at really large agencies, like the Los Angeles Police Department, for example, they have an internal affairs division that is larger than most police departments, just by itself, right? Because they have, last I heard, something in the line of 10,000 police officers in the city of Los Angeles, and they have a history of being critiqued for not doing a good job on their internal affairs investigations, so they're trying to be much more robust about it. But that's clearly an outlier. Like, we are not back in many different ways. One of them is size. So for an agency the size of Marin County, I'd say this assignment model is not unusual. The other assignment model that you might see in a place like the size of Marin County is have a much smaller number of investigators that only do a team. So, but that has the pros and cons. If you only have two, they might not have as wide an experience as the 6 that you're hearing about today. And then when you look at the number of complaints that Marin County currently has, 2 full-time investigators might be overkill. So yeah, it's interesting to see how these models vary with agencies the size of Marin's. And the model you heard about today is not uncommon. Thank you. Yeah.
Any more questions for John?
I have a comment. As we were talking about the outreach, this past Friday, John met with myself and 4 of the ministers in Marin City for about an hour. One, just to introduce them to John and what the role of the Inspector General, plus this opportunity that I told him about my position on the commission, representing the 3rd district. And from that, there's going to be a follow-up meeting that John would be speaking at. There's an organization, well, it's part of the St. Andrew's Church. It's called Come to the Table, where they bring Marin City residents and other people from outside of Marin City to have dinner and have a forum. And so this forum is going to October 10th. And I'll make sure everybody get this. It's hosted by St. Andrew's Church. It's called Policing the Police. And John is going to be on the panel. And I know they want a representative from the Sheriff's Union. I'm not sure anyone else that they mentioned.
Well, I remember having that conversation on Friday and I thought the date was a little tentative, but maybe.
He's
maybe
just
it's
called,
pretty-
he just called me, but I can't.
Oh, did he? Okay, great.
He wants it, he's gonna
We're on.
do follow up. And,
Well, then-
and so we're waiting for, to be introduced to the Marine City Community Services District. They're just trying to get their schedule together. But and plus I had prepared a report that I will make sure that all of the commissioners receive. It's a historical overview of police community relations in Marin City from the 1940s to the present. So it was very productive. Yeah. And the presentation that you gave at Marin Forum, the PowerPoint, it was very educational, and I'm not sure if all the commissioners have it. I don't, but I would recommend that we all get that.
Well done, John, getting out there. I encourage other commissioners to get into your districts and your areas. If there are no more questions, we can open it up to the public.
I think we can. We have,
Oh, I'm sorry, we got one more. We got one more. Final update, item number 3 under this area is the ad hoc subcommittee. Since the training subcommittee is sunsetting, since the training curriculum subcommittee and outreach engagement subcommittee have agenda items later in the agenda, we're going to move that to later. And so we'll hold the updates into the agenda items later tonight. And then we'll move forward with the surveillance subcommittee to give the report. So
I will be giving the report for that. And the subcommittee, it's me and Commissioner Gaston. And the surveillance technologies ad hoc continues to meet frequently. We have held 3 meetings since our last full commission meeting, and we have completed an actual work plan that will guide our research over the next several months so that we can potentially return a set of recommendations to the full commission by the end of the year. Right now, we are primarily educating ourselves. There's a lot of material that we're going through, but on automatic license plate readers, including but not limited to Flock, as well as the Peregrine system. A major part of our work plan is making sure that we are gathering information from a variety of perspectives and subject matter experts. We've already met with representatives from MB Free, and we will also be meeting with someone from the sheriff's office. In addition, we really wanted to get people in from other jurisdictions who have either stopped using Flock or stopped using Flock and then reinstated the use of it to get their perspectives. In addition, our hope is to get a well-rounded range of information and perspectives from subject matter experts we meet with so that our eventual recommendations are informed by various viewpoints. We also are reviewing a lot of material on an ongoing basis as the Flock is ever evolving, especially building our understanding of these technologies and how they are being used or misused. This has included news articles, Flock data sets, and the proposed Peregrine contract with the County of Marin and a variety of other materials. We are trying to develop a very solid, well-informed foundation of understanding that will ultimately help us meet the goal of the subcommittee and bring thoughtful recommendations back to the full commission. One area where we would like some input from the commission is whether we should also be including the use of body-worn cameras by deputies as a part of this work, or whether we determine that is a separate issue that can be looked into on a separate ad hoc subcommittee, and that this current one may not need to include that. So feedback on that is what we're looking for. Happy to answer any questions.
I have a question.
Mhm.
This all came up because of Flock, and it seemed like you guys are going way to the left a little bit. I would like to really hone in on if we can get this thing resolved. The community was talking about Flock cameras just a few months ago. That's what it was about. Other counties are dealing with it. They're dropping them like flies. And so I feel like it's a lot of busy work. versus really honing in on FLOP right now. We can always do another subcommittee on cameras and all that other stuff, but
Okay.
my opinion is that we really hone in on FLOP and get a recommendation sooner or later, and that's, well, I'm not gonna call it busy work, it's an important work,
Yeah.
but you guys know that, right? And hone in on FLOP, so we can get the public back some information on what our recommendations are.
When you're saying flock, are you including
The cameras.
Karen in that too?
Paraguay, I heard the community talking about that. So
Okay.
if those two go together, I'm assuming
Yeah.
that's together, right?
Yeah, I would say don't add bottled one campus, that's something completely different, I think. What you all were looking.
I agree with that. I think you guys are, it's a big task in and of itself right now, so just. No.
Okay, perfect.
I think to the extent it's taking a lot of time for you guys to get educated, you have to educate all of us as well, so.
You have comments, commissioners, before we move to public comment?
Well, I agree with Commissioner from her that we have been discussing this, but we really need to just go on and hone in and make a final recommendation, because every time you pick up the newspaper or the news, it's this constant about the flock. So we just need to make that recommendation to this commission and get it over with. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna close out. Thank you, everyone. Great topics. We want to move into public comment.
So in person, I think you have public comment, is that correct?
But you can go online.
You can go ahead, yeah. We have one person online, so I think it would.
Good evening.
Everyone, hi, Merchant, thank you for your informative presentation. Okay, so a couple things came up for me, having those three items switched together as well. But the questions that came up for me are, I think Lieutenant Baker answered this question for this year, how many complaints come from coworkers to kind of look at the culture of the sheriff's office and if people are willing to report their colleagues when they're concerned about something. When he said 9 were internally generated out of the 18 this year, I took that to mean those were colleagues. I'm not sure if that's correct. I also think that you all should be looking at what are the key performance indicators around these complaints? Like, what are the most common complaints that come in, no matter what is determined, because that will help you know how the community feels about their relationship with law enforcement. And then what's the most common sustained complaint? Like, what are they finding actually happened? Is it a policy violation? Is it excessive force? Is it rudeness? And then I'm wondering, because the sheriff in his memo on July 21st to Supervisor Lucan and the board said, please be assured that regardless of the nature of the complaints received, my staff and I continue to use the information we gather as a result of these citizens, which I hope you'll consider changing that word, complaints, to help identify any developing trends and provide ongoing training opportunities for deputies. So what does that look like? Because he's promising that they're using trends to do performance improvement. So what does that look like? What trainings have come up as a result of these? And then, like, words matter. So if it's called a citizen's complaint across the front, what do undocumented people feel when they want to make a complaint? And then I want to know how this commission finds out about the Title 15 complaints. What are they, if they're getting referred here and then they go?
Thank you, Heidi.
It's important for us to know that.
And your comment about the time squished in.
Yes, I'll send you a note.
Thank you. It's no, you don't have to do that. It's already noted. It's noted.
I didn't finish.
Got a few more items coming up. Good evening.
Go ahead. I won't start until you speak.
What was the training process? But from understanding, like, per the federal or state, you guys get a year to respond. So my question is, will the new organizing or the agreement you come up with, will that make the current 1-year agreement null and void? Or is that statute per federal or state? I mean, does that matter? Because what I've experienced and seen and heard that no matter what the complaint is, that departments take that full year for obvious reasons. They make people wait. They have that right, that year is there. And they use that year. So will that change? Is it federal, state mandate rule that they have up to a year? Regarding the panel that's coming up, this next month in October, I'm assuming you're gonna have someone from the community on there besides a committee member?
It is,
Yes.
oh, I'm sorry.
No, thank you. She has a Brown Act ability to respond afterwards. Thank you. Program Brown. I'm assuming that will be someone from the community that's outside this council on in that October community meeting. One more. Is it okay? Few seconds. What was my last comment? Damn it, you know. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Give me one moment. Hi, Jason, you can go ahead and speak.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I really think all complaints should be tracked within the MCSO. Based on what I heard during the presentation, for example, if a letter came to the sheriff about a complaint and he handled it, it wouldn't be tracked. Or if a person reported something in the jail and the deputy sheriff handled it, it wouldn't be tracked. How do we know they didn't take the complaint seriously enough and just brush the complainant off? What I'm hearing is there are complaints coming in that aren't getting tracked. I have problems with that. To me, that just tells me there are systemic gaps in MCSO's complaint system. I think it's worth the time of the COC to look into those gaps and make recommendations to address it. Again, that's why I believe it's so important to get the commission's complaint process up and running. Thank you.
There are no others?
No one else?
There are no others.
Okay.
We're done.
We're gonna move forward with our next agenda item. Thank you. Public comment is now closed and we'll move forward to the commission discussion on the 3 items and if any other closing out topics. Guys, anything else?
You can give somebody an opportunity to respond to.
So now Felicia, can you want me to respond?
Oh, yeah, the come to the table is organized by, the pastor at St. Andrew's Church, so they do all the selection. I'm just a messenger. That came out of the meeting with John, with the minister. But that was their action plan. They actually asked, what could they do to bring John and others to the community? But I have no clue on who's gonna be represented. But you can talk to Elsa Floyd yourself. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. There's no other action other than to receive these reports, and so I'm going to close the item and move on to the next item. Consider adopting training curriculum and possible sunsetting of associated ad hoc subcommittee. So we're going to move on. Our next item is to consider adopting a training curriculum and possibly sunsetting list of our associated ad hoc committee. I'll invite staff and the training curriculum ad hoc subcommittee to provide an update on the commission's spending curriculum. Staff and subcommittee will provide.
As for the training curriculum, I had a chance to take a look at it after I finished it. And I had a chance to chat with Lieutenant Baker about it as well. And also with the subcommittee. And we all thought it's an excellent plan. If anything, it's a lot of training. I would not think that you'd be able to get it done in, say, just 1 year. But I do think that it's a very thorough list and I like it. So I, as you saw in the staff report, recommend you approve it as is. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. I also suggest that you could wind down, I think effectively automatically do, by completing this project, wind down the ad hoc. was used to create it. And ponder whether you might want to have an ad hoc that helps provide me some guidance as to what training you want to do over the next year. As we're moving through it, you might have some thoughts about which training is the highest priority in the next 12 months. I wouldn't mind working with some of the commissioners about that now and again over the next few months if you're up for an ad hoc. And if not, let me know and I'll just guide you through all the training on my own. You'll have to, basically have the menu I give you that. That's up to you.
Interesting. Any questions for the committee members or for John? All right.
And Stephen wanted to provide you just a little bit of a reminder about how ad hoc work as you think about that.
Yeah, so you have a couple items on ad hocs, and just a reminder, an ad hoc subcommittee is part of the Brown Act, and so you can form a standing committee which exists for to continue on for problems or issues or anything that you want to form. And it's a permanent ongoing concern. It is subject to the Brown Act, even when it has less than a full quorum of members. When you create an ad hoc subcommittee, it's a temporary subcommittee with a temporary purpose. And so the items that you're dealing with today on training and curriculum, and then you will be going also with the outreach and engagement plan. When you decide to adopt the plan, that concludes the ad hoc committee. And so the ad hoc committee ends because it was temporary in nature. So just a reminder of why we're using the term ad hoc and what it means for your.
I just know it has the beginning and the end. That's the way I see it. All right, after no more questions, we're going to open up for public comment on this item. Each public should have 2 minutes to speak on it.
I'll just make this one really fast. I hope you'll consider inviting the San Rafael Police Advisory and Accountability Committee to any trainings that you have that aren't sheriff's office specific. So that both bodies can collaborate together across Marin and maybe take advantage of shared training opportunities. Thank you.
We have one Zoom speaker.
Okay.
James, you're allowed to speak.
Hi, thank
you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. First, I want to say thank you for all of your hard work and effort. I think this committee is so well needed, and it will just ultimately be great for everybody, citizens and our law enforcement. So I have several questions. The first of which is the public records I know can be requested online through the Marin County portal, and that those requests are routed to the appropriate desks to determine what documents can be released. Is there a way where you guys might eventually be able to set it up where you could be included and be notified if any of those document requests are related to any complaints that might have been filed? I also would like to know if you'll be working in collaboration with the other individual police departments in Marin County, in addition to the Central Marin Police Authority. I know they have their individual, civilian oversight committees, but is there any way where you could work together and share knowledge of what you've learned as you are operating as a committee? In regards to how the sheriff department or the jail are being operated. Third question I have is, will all of your investigations be only opened from now going forward, or will you have will you be looking at any retroactive cases? And my last question is, in light of the security for the correctional officers at the jail, and the jail staff and yourselves, when you go on a tour, you mentioned it would sort of have to be scheduled ahead of time, but would that not defeat the purpose of touring a facility when the whole purpose is really to see what happens when nobody's looking? So, and one last question, I'm sorry, I hope I'm under 2 minutes. You mentioned investigations in the case of an inmate death.
We are over time for you. I appreciate your comments. Thank you so much. They're noted. Any other public comment?
There is no public comment.
All right, we are at a point where we need to thank the public for their comments. This item is now closed for public comment. We'll move on to commission discussion adopting the community outreach and engagement plan. Where am I?
Oh, motion.
I'm here. Jump.
Yeah, see you.
I see where it is. All right, thank you, public. About the training curriculum, I need a motion to approve. There are no comments or questions from commissioners. Have you all seen the training curriculum? No. Is it in our packet?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it. I do need a motion to approve it.
I make a motion to approve the training curriculum.
I got a second? Thank you, Commissioner Lee. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions, motion carries. Okay. All right, here we have the next, item number 6 on the agenda. Do you have a comment?
So if we want to have some sway as to what we do this first year, does anybody want to join me in doing that? Solange? So how do we?
Do you want to set up another ad hoc
I guess we
committee? Is that
form
something
another
I just do or?
That is something, well, as I think you might have heard, your bylaws got approved by the supervisors last week, right? And your new bylaws say that the chair can create an ad hoc at any time. So it could happen at a meeting or that could happen tomorrow in this particular case. So now we know this.
And then down, interesting. Anybody else interested?
Got 2 commissioners interested.
No, okay,
I'll be in touch with both of you and
okay. We trust you guys. All right, we're gonna move on to item number 6. Our next item is to consider adopting of our community outreach and engagement plan and possible sunsetting of our associated ad hoc subcommittee. I'll invite staff and community outreach engagement members to update us on the plan. Is that your Commissioner Beth? Or is it?
So a comment? Make a comment?
Yeah, whatever the report is on the outreach and engagement plan, we're gonna sunset it. I think the plan
Yeah.
is done.
I'm really pleased with how this plan looks. We did a lot of great work on it. So I have to, and I'm glad that we're starting to make some movement on this outreach plan. And again, working with John, we're planning on doing a lot more. I do have a comment on the letter that goes out to the, say, Marin neighbors. And I did make some feedback to you, John, and then I feel like we need to have a code or link to how people can sign up, or the QR code on the letter on how they can sign up to get the newsletter or when the meetings are held. And maybe there should be some type of phone number for to you, or would it go to? I guess it would go to you, but there should be some kind of contact information. With it. And I'm ready to send mine out.
Okay, makes you think of a couple things I would note briefly. One is you saw the staff report. I also looked at this plan and worked with the ad hoc on, well, reviewed it with the ad hoc. The ad hoc wrote it over the last year. I'm a review for this plan. I thought, like the training curriculum, this is an excellent plan. And I really think it's a lot to accomplish. So, to my mind, I would recommend that you go ahead and approve it. I could use a little help from commissioners who are interested in helping us actually accomplish some of the tasks. People who might be historically to say, be the ones to sign off on changes to a letter, like the one you were just describing, Commissioner Gaston. Or commissioners who feel like they might be particularly interested in finding opportunities for the rest of the commissioners to show up at for outreach. Those kinds of contributions would be really solid in this next 12 months and different from writing the plan. So a new and different ad hoc, I would think. So if there are commissioners who are interested in doing that and it needs to be approval of the chair, I'd be happy to help with such an ad hoc.
Okay. Sarah and Felicia?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm missing it. I don't think John was here for that meeting yet, but I gave extensive feedback on the previous one that was submitted, and I don't see anything in here about doing outreach at the jail, or at College of Marin, or incorporating, I mean, there's a ton of other there's the Youth Transforming Justice, there's the Youth Advisory Board. I mean, none of that is in here, and I'm just, especially the jail. The jail was something that I was really adamant about. That is where we need to do outreach for people that are incarcerated, maybe not the jail, but people that are incarcerated and their families. Like that is, we need to get to those folks, because I guarantee you, as being someone who has been both in jail and visiting a loved one in jail, there's a lot to be said. And I think that those voices go underrepresented and unheard. And I think it's imperative that we include them in the outreach, and I don't see it anywhere in here.
So you can add them, right? You send it to.
Well, I don't feel comfortable approving this right now. When that was my like input last time, and I don't see it anywhere in here. And if we're gonna approve something as like our outreach, I don't know what this is called. Yeah, our outreach, community outreach and engagement plan, and it's missing especially jail outreach and families of loved ones in jail.
In here, number 2.6 says impact the community's engagement, prioritize outreach to individuals who are currently incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, and their families.
Yeah, but I don't understand why it's not in these appendices.
In what?
In the appendices, and like events I remember I specifically talked about College Marin. Like College Marin has a program there for formerly incarcerated students. And
But it does mention formerly incarcerated students, and what John is asking is that we, after we approve this plan, the subcommittee will get together and add additional things. This is not, I mean, I'm sure this is supposed to be really extensive if we had everything in there. I don't feel comfortable going into the jails to do outreach, but I can go into communities and do outreach where people live to talk about this. So, but that's where this other ad hoc committee will meet with John to continue to extend this work.
I just think Appendix B and Appendix C are incomplete. And I don't.
So can we approve it and then just add all these additional names and organizations that you're talking about?
I mean, I would say they're definitely incomplete.
And we might even.
But it
start
definitely
adding-
notes
it's
that
it's
too.
like a work in progress. Like on the list of community organizations, we might like, oh, we forgot somebody else and let's add them. So I see this as a work in progress.
But the plan itself is sound, right?
Yeah.
And you're saying that some of the organizations, we need to add more organizations, and I think, John, is that something you can work with the new ad hoc committee on?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're approving this, but then we're gonna change it?
No,
We're not changing the plan. We are changing the community organizations that are, it's listed.
the community organizations are just a sampling of the ones we could think of, so we need.
They're not all inclusive.
If it helps. Again, I just saw this in the last couple of months so I wasn't here when you all did the first year, but as I read it, the way it landed with me was that appendices B and C would be living documents that would get longer, expanded over time as we met more people in community and added on layers of better understanding of who we should be reaching out to. So I didn't take those as a limit on outreach, but as starting points.
Starting point, right.
But, it is the commission's document, so let me know what to think.
I'm gonna take it to a vote.
Sure.
Any other comments from commissioners?
Public time.
Oh, we haven't done it yet? Let's open the public comment.
Close out.
Okay, hello everyone. Just real quickly, I don't see why you can't add a couple things that are important to the organizations. Like, I really do feel like families and people who are incarcerated are some of the groups that are most impacted by the sheriff's office and most closely work with. If you're in a housing unit for a year, you're gonna have deputies in every part of your life, if they're gonna have insight in there. So adding, I think you can approve with a couple amendments. And Commissioner McCoy can let you know what amendments would be.
Thank you.
The jail is important, but something you're actually gonna name every single entity. I guess it's a living document you can, but I don't know, you gotta do what you're gonna do, but. You know, add agency every month, every meeting, but it's important, engagement is important, of course, I'm with that. Clock is wrong too. But give me more time, I'm not complaining, but so the engagement part is very important. And as Marin City being probably the most affected community in the state of California regarding inequities, it's not probably Marin City being the most affected community regarding equities of all kinds, and of all kinds, policing being there at the top of the list with a few others. The community is unaware of this committee, Marin City. You guys say, oh, it's not the time yet. We haven't got the Inspector General yet. Who says they don't want to know about this community? If he's here or not? Says who? So engaging is very, very important. When will I'm directing my question to you, Mr. Palmer, you're the president. I said, when will the community of Marin City be alerted of this board, the most negatively affected community in the state of California? RaceCounts.com, Marin County being top of the list. In this document, I would recommend, I haven't read it to be honest, I'd recommend using the QR code type deal where someone could maybe look up. It's in there, I apologize, what was in there? Oh no, so you can use it is? QR, oh, great.
Thank you, Damien.
Well, we have one Zoom user.
Let's go.
One.
Okay.
Hi, Tara. You are welcome to speak.
Hi there, thank you. This is Tara Evans in District 4, and I'm wondering whether, I've been listening in a little bit, whether we're talking about customer complaints or we're talking about community engagement. I'm wondering what type of protections exist for both complaints and also just general conversations when you engage communities. For those who really fear retaliation from past experiences, or maybe their family's past experiences, or maybe simply because they're undocumented or any other potential reason why they might have fear of retaliation. And I'm also especially thinking about jail staff or those incarcerated who may wish to have conversations and engage and be part of the community engagement or to offer a complaint. Will there be any explicitly stated protections put in place for those individuals either before the conversation starts or up on the website, or a combination of both, and in multiple languages and ways people receive the information itself? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions?
No other questions.
Good. All right. Thank you. Public comment is now closed, and we'll move on to commission discussion adopting a community outreach and engagement plan.
So my take, just the appendices, is that how you say it? Are information we've gathered. The plan itself is the one, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So I have a question, is this gonna be, I mean, I have a couple questions, but is this gonna be like posted on our website and it's always gonna be continuously updated?
I mean, the appendices?
Or the whole the whole plan?
No, the plan is set, right? I mean, we're adopting a plan, so it's not,
Potentially,
yeah,
I'm just saying.
no.
We're adopting a full plan that we put
But that's
together
what I'm
on
saying,
the year.
is this gonna be posted on our website? And if so, is it gonna be updated regularly? Cause that's what I'm being told, that it's gonna be a working document.
So
I know, but that's what I'm saying, if this is on our website, is this gonna be updated?
Well, I don't know, is that gonna be on our website? I mean, it should be updated, whether or not we are reaching out to all those things all the time, I doubt that, but.
We haven't seen all these, and this is just sort of a
These are
working
just-
list. that
These
you-
are the ones that we came up with that.
Yeah, I'm just, like, for my district specifically, like, the civic center farmers market's not on here. Jail isn't on here, like, so I just, you know. Want my district to be represented, and the things that I find important to include from my personal district.
Which would be good to add.
Yeah.
You can just
So
add
we
them.
can add, I mean,
Okay. But okay, so aside from the appendices, in the youth engagement pipeline, there's like a lot of examples, but I think there are some key examples that are missing.
Then you can add them to the appendices at a later date.
Add them tomorrow. Does it make sense?
But this isn't
Does it
in-
make sense to table it till next meeting and maybe have Sarah?
But I'm saying, can I say, I make a motion to adopt this with the inclusion of youth transforming justice, rising scholars and advisory board.
You
Yeah, I
add
can do
individual
that.
organizations that are gonna be on the appendices.
Well,
list, right?
Performing Stars, Youth Leadership Institute, all that is in here, so why can't?
well, I would say, so I just think it's necessary to add it to this. I think those were just examples that came to
It's
mind
better.
as we were putting it together.
It's not exclusion.
I don't think we should table it, we should.
I made a motion to adopt this with the inclusion of Youth Transforming Justice, Rising Scholars and the Youth Advisory Board.
And you're
In
saying,
the partner with existing youth and social
These
justice
just
programs.
examples of some.
Okay, I'm just saying, that's my motion. If no one wants to second it, no one has to second it, but that's my motion.
Okay, I will call a motion. You don't mind.
Well, you can't, I
Any
just
other
call,
question?
I just,
Hold on, I didn't call a motion yet, Sarah. You're getting way up in. Any other questions on this topic? We had, Doug talked about table it to next month.
Yeah, I think if we table it next month, I mean, I hate to keep delaying this, the work's, but the work's largely done. I think if you'll just take a step back, Sarah can outline her concerns and maybe document them, then the ad hoc committee can get together, incorporate it in a clean document that everybody's gonna do it. You know, quick.
We would still have to vote on that, and we need a majority to approve that, right?
I have a question for Susan.
Go ahead.
Am I able to make a motion to adopt this with the inclusion of the things that I say? And that way it doesn't have to be tabled, it can just be.
Yes, and anyone can make a motion to deal with this problem.
Okay.
specifically.
Okay.
It's a problem.
I mean, I guess the only issue I would have is if we make that motion and then they put it in, but it's still not exactly what you want, then.
Oh, no, I just said those three things that I think are crucial to the youth part.
Okay, any other comments before I call for a motion? All right, I want to call for a motion to move this outreach and engagement agenda plan forward.
I make a motion to adopt this plan with the inclusion.
We need to find out if there's a second and take a vote on it before we can have a new
I'll
vote.
second.
Okay, I'm so confused.
Okay, she was stating her, she was stating
No,
her motion.
Now you can make an addition.
Okay.
No, we can only have one motion pending at a time. So
Okay.
there's a motion pending and a second.
Right.
So we need to resolve that before.
I didn't think she was finished making her motion, that's why I haven't called for the second yet.
Stephen and I, thought you just.
Yes.
You did-
Oh, no, no. No,
Okay,
That was,
Okay.
I misunderstood.
Thought you should make a motion too.
there's a motion on the floor, Sarah, to approve this plan, is what I was saying, with the additions. Now we have a second. Thank you, Reverend. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? I thought that means abstain. Motion carries. All right. Thank you all the hard work. This was a lot of work, Felicia and Felicia, and you guys did a lot. This is amazing work.
Question, who's gonna add those? You have.
So the next thing,
You have them written down
two
somewhere?
people who are interested in working with John, and that's Sarah and Felicia to do the additions to the appendices.
Okay.
All right. And anybody else interested?
I can.
All right. This is the commission for us.
And we'll add more like contact information and phone numbers and email.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, that item is closed. We are gonna move on to, I have one more, I think, see where I'm at on here. All right, we are moving on to item number 7. Annual election of officers pursuant by the bylaws, Article 5, Section 1. I'm really excited that the Board of Supervisors approved our bylaws.
Yeah.
Well done, Commissioner. We worked really hard on those too. Lynn, thank you. Let's see, are there any questions from commissioners on where we're at with inviting staff to remind us about our adopted bylaws or the election of officers and the recommendation on this item? Any staff, you guys want to comment on that?
I'll just give you the brief input that it is time to look at officers again, chair and vice chair. And our original recommendation in the staff report was we think about whether we would do it tonight or another night, because we thought we wanted to have that. As it turns out, we have all 9 of you here.
Wow.
And since it's a full commission and it's August, flip that recommendation and suggest you take care of it. But that is, of course, up to you. I do think that you have to take some action tonight, even if that's to put it to another date for some specific reason.
Any questions, commissioners, from staff? I'll not open up the public. I'm sorry.
So we can make a motion tonight?
Yes.
It's on the agenda to vote.
Oh, okay.
But now we're gonna open it up for public comment. If there are no questions from commissioners, speakers have 2 minutes.
Mr. Rao, do you make the public comment now or during the motion? During the motion?
We're open public comments open right now on this item.
We're on item 7. No, I know. Do you want to do the motion or you do it before the item? I'm asking.
Public comment comes before the motion, yes.
Always.
Thank you.
Any public comment online?
Thing online.
Yeah, I have a comment. Just looking at, the selection process, your thoughts about who should be the next, what's your position, president or?
Chair.
Chair, that whoever you pick, you can pick the same person if you want, different person, whoever you, someone that is kind, that's humble, that's relaxed, that will listen, like you did a great job this year, thank you. I assume they'll pick someone else, I have no idea, that's usually how it works. That will listen, that we all are arrogant to a degree at some point, we'll throw that arrogance to the side. Understand that it is political, that's true, it's a political position, political board, and you will put as much political BS aside as much as you can to be the best chair that you can. I've heard things, and it's a small community, about things that I'll leave it at that it's about politics, and people want to invoke outside politics in this, which gets us off focus from the community, right? Community like Rand City, that is the most affected community in the state of California regarding inequities, policing being the top. We have data, how we were freaking harassed for so many years. The data is there. Someone who can sit there, like Gina has done, and will listen and understand what people have gone through. Pick someone that is not arrogant. That's all I ask.
Thank you. Any other comments?
No other comment.
Okay, thank you. Public comment is now closed, and we'll move on to the commission discussion of this item, which is either to conduct the election or postpone it to the next meeting. I think we all decided to conduct it. Who's gonna help us do that?
Motion now?
I would suggest the traditional technique is to take nominations for chair. And then after that is resolved, take nominations for vice chair and then vote for vice chair.
Can you reiterate what the bylaws talks about as far as terms, and if I can, you know, if the current chair can run for another term or current vice chair can run for another term? Just reiterate what was approved.
I believe current chair can do a back-to-back term.
Yep, that's.
Yeah, and vice chair.
Yep, that's correct. So both our current chair and vice chair could do another term. The explain staff for here.
Oh my God.
The bylaws with regard to this issue are in Article 5. I included a portion of those bylaws in your staff report as a reminder. One portion of that bylaw says that both the chair and the vice chair are supposed to be elected annually at the first meeting after August 1, last meeting, so you're on time. There is a provision there about term limits there, which we were just hearing from Commissioner Lee. That's correct. 2 consecutive terms, 1 year apiece. So both our chair and vice chair can run again. And then the duties of the chair and the vice chair are detailed in the bylaws. Some of the details of the chair include presiding over meetings, representing the commission, signing official documents, and as we were discussing earlier, naming the members of ad hoc subcommittees and getting those spun up and running. The chair also sets meeting agendas in collaboration with the staff liaison, which right now is the inspector general. And then the vice chair assumes and performs the duties of the chair if the chair is not available at a meeting, or if for some reason the position of chair is vacant. And the chair has the ability to advise the chair and the staff liaison on meeting agendas. So traditionally, what we've been doing over the last year is have a meeting with the chair, the vice chair, and the staff liaison to discuss meeting agendas for the upcoming meeting and stuff like that. We really want to get down to brass tacks about the bylaws. Technically, it's the chair and compensation.
John, how do we, Stephen, how do we run this election? Can somebody nominate somebody, or do we have to do it on paper? What do we do?
So I think John has a good proposal, which is you nominate, and then if there's 2 or more candidates, you have a vote, and then if somebody gets a majority, they're the chair, and if there's top 2 vote getters, you vote between those 2.
Okay. I need a motion.
Oh, I was gonna say,
I think Commissioner Cromer has done a great job, and I would nominate her to for another term. I would maybe add, like, the next item is the upcoming meetings. If you're able to do it, I just want to make sure you're able to attend at least most of the meetings.
Yeah, stay consistent what we're doing.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Tom.
So I would nominate.
Yeah, I'd second that. And I don't know if we do vice chair as well, but I think it makes sense for the dynamic duo to stay together here.
Yeah.
We just got started. I think you guys do a fantastic job, honestly. And Sarah, when you pinch hit when Chair Farmer's out, it's you do a great job. And I think we're just hitting our stride now. I think it'd be a shame to break the momentum.
Right.
I would agree with that. I think continuity of leadership right now is a good thing for us. I think we're just getting running, and I think that it makes sense for you to stay on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I agree. Chair and vice chair.
Thanks, Jen. Okay. All right, so
I agree too.
thank you. I need a motion to do this, and then we'll do a second, right?
I make a motion to vote.
We already
made a motion.
He already did.
Chair.
Okay, Tom moves to make.
I'll accept a friendly amendment to make
For both,
for both of them.
that's an acceptable procedure.
All right.
All right, there's a motion on the floor to approve Dr. Fromer and Sarah McAvoy as vice chair and chair, Dr. Fromer. Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Thank you for the vote of confidence, folks. I know. We are at item number 8, I believe. Is that the 8? The next item is meeting scheduling, including annual meeting schedule and possible retreats. Let's say thank you. Are there any questions for commissioners or staff? If not, I'll open for public comment.
Yeah, I think mine's more.
We'll go to public comment on this item.
I think I'm due.
All right, so public comment is closed on this item, and we will close. Do I have a motion to what about dates for future meetings?
Yeah.
Let me
Yeah.
just ask the commission a question. You've got this chart in tail end of the packet. It shows what your upcoming meetings would be. Stick with the current schedule of 7 days. Again, for continuity purposes, I think keeping the same meeting time is a help to the public, so they know when to find you. We did want to make sure to flag for you potential conflicts. The October meeting is Indigenous Peoples' Day. That is not an official county holiday here in the county of Marin. So from a staff perspective, we can staff that perfectly well. So I entirely defer to you all to let me know what you'd like to do about that. Happy to keep it on that date, and I think that's your call, but we really like a potential conflict for you. Staffing issue, not a problem, but if for other reasons you want to move that date, let us know. Hopefully sooner rather than later. It doesn't have to be tonight, but the sooner you let us know, the easier it is for us to staff the meeting appropriately.
Are we gonna set the whole schedule tonight?
That's the recommendation from staff.
Okay.
Yes.
Those 2 alternatives.
Okay.
And then November 9th conflicts with the annual NAPOL conference. Now, I would be at that conference. So far, I know of 3 commissioners who want to go. Current Brown Act rules in California do not allow for remote participation for members of the panel, unless there's some very specified exceptions like illness. Being at a conference is not one of them. For better or for worse, that's the current rule. I don't know that I agree with that necessarily, but that's the rule. That rule doesn't necessarily apply for staff. But on the other hand, if I were at the NAPOL conference and you all had a meeting, I would need to do some other work to make sure other people could physically be here. Like I could give you a report online, but I don't. There would be a little bit of work we want to do to make sure.
Can we do a doodle poll on October and November dates as soon as
We absolutely could do that between now and the next meeting, and when we meet in September, we could share that with you and let you know.
Okay.
Okay? Would you like us to do that?
Yeah.
Can I make a pitch for November 16th?
Can we just vote on it now?
We can. You guys.
Also,
Yeah.
are we talking about the potential retreat in this section too? And if so, are we gonna, I know that was in the past.
Is that part of it? Am I not?
Several commissioners had mentioned earlier that they thought
Yeah.
the retreat is interesting, but the commission as a whole is not. So as long as you're setting your annual schedule, one thing we can talk about. I would preview for you that the things we've talked about having on in September would include the operational agreement presentation that I just talked about and the commission setting a work plan for the next 12 months. So if you wanted to do a retreat, what would it be about and when would you have it? Would probably be the question. You don't have to decide that tonight, but.
We'll think about it. We'll talk about it in our meeting that we have with you and then
Okay.
bring it back to the
So we'll put
commission.
the retreat off maybe for a little bit and I think I'm hearing different ideas from the commissioners about whether we're gonna do a Google poll or figure out the October, November dates right now. And I'm happy to serve them.
I vote for, let's decide now.
Yeah.
So we can block out our schedules and it would help us rather than wait another month or so.
You guys have your calendars with you?
November 16th works for me.
Works for me too. And then what about October? October
Either.
19th.
I'm flexible.
Everybody okay?
The 5th works better for, no, it doesn't, never mind.
Do we not wanna meet on Indigenous Peoples' Day, I guess is the question.
I can meet that day, the other two are tough for me, so.
You can on the
I
12th?
can on the 12th, the 5th I'm out of town, and the 19th. So.
No, I can't do it.
Yeah, we wanna honor that.
16th looks good for me, for sure.
16th
And,
November, it sounds like that, everybody.
I think the 19th is better for me, not the 5th.
Yeah. Okay.
October 19th, will we have quorum on the 19th? Nice.
Maybe I could ask this question, if we're gonna, sounds like we have consensus to move the October meeting off of Indigenous Peoples' Day.
Yeah,
Right.
So if we're gonna do that, the options we've suggested are the 5th and the 9th. We could do a show of hands for each two dates.
5th and 19th.
Sorry. Absolutely right, the 5th and the 19th. We do a show of hands for each date as to who's available, we know which one we have more for, yeah.
let's do October 19th.
All the two. We had 7 commissioners on the 19th,
Okay.
and the other one was the 5th.
I mean, I could do
I'm out
that.
of town.
Yeah, you have far more people on the 19th,
yeah.
that sounds like the date.
Okay. And November 16th?
Okay.
That's everybody.
Okay.
Do you wanna look at November 2nd too, or no?
No,
No, 16th it
It's
is.
supposed to election day, I might be, no telling when I'm gonna be.
Oh. That's
Under bar somewhere. Sorry. Sorry. Don't put that on the
For the
record.
election, but still.
So I think I need a motion to change the dates.
Yes, please.
Okay, can I get a motion to change the dates to October 16th and 19th, I'm sorry, October 19th and November 16th, 2026.
I make a motion to change our dates for the October 12th meeting to the 19th and for the November 9th meeting to the 16th.
Give me a second.
Second.
Thank you, Raj. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Hey. John, don't be having this agenda look like this again. Okay, that concludes our agenda for today. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Thank you, Reverend Robinette. Second, thank you. All those in favor? All opposed? All right. Meeting adjourned.
We did it.
Listen,